There is a man underground, not hiding in a cave, not running, underground, in a stone basin carved into the earth, designed for pressing grapes, doing something that makes no physical sense in that location. He is threshing wheat in a wine press. Now, if you know anything about ancient agriculture, you already feel how wrong that is. Threshing wheat requires wind. You go to the highest, most open ground you can find. You throw the grain into the air and let the breeze carry the chaff away. In a wine press, a sunken pit below ground level, there is no wind. The chaff falls right back down onto the grain. Every handful he throws up comes falling back, over and over. The work is real. The effort is real. The results are almost nothing. But he keeps going. Because going to the open threshing floor means being seen, and being seen right now means being killed. His name is Gideon, and in a few moments, God is going to walk up to this man, in this pit, doing this useless thing in this wrong location, and say something that has been quoted in sermons and printed on church bulletins and passed down through generations of well-meaning Bible teachers. Go in this might of yours. And almost everyone who reads that verse reads it the same way. God is giving Gideon a pep talk. God is saying, you have what it takes. Believe in yourself. The strength is already inside you. That is the reading. That is what most people carry home from Judges 6:14. But stay with this, because God was pointing at something specific when he said, this might. The word this in Hebrew is not decorative. It is a pointer. It indicates something present, something visible, something already in that wine press in that moment. And when you see what was actually in there, you will never read the word strength the same way again. To understand what Gideon is doing in that wine press, you have to understand what Israel has just lived through. Judges 6 opens with one of the most sobering sentences in the entire Old Testament. The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hand of Midian 7 years. 7 years, not one raid, not a single season of loss, 7 consecutive years of the same devastation, arriving on schedule, stripping everything before Israel could get its hands on it. Here is what that looked like on the ground. The Midianites did not come alone. They came with the Amalekites and the people of the east, and Judges 6:5 tells us they came like locusts, too many to count, with camels that could not be numbered. Now stop there for a moment, because camels in this period were not just livestock. They were military technology. They gave the Midianites a speed and a range of movement that Israel had no answer for. You could not outrun them. You could not predict their path. By the time Israel mobilized any kind of response, the Midianites were already gone, and so was everything else. And the destruction was systematic, not random, not opportunistic. They waited for the crops to be almost ready. Then they moved in. First, their own people ate through the vegetables and the fruit. Then, their cattle were released into the cereal fields and consumed the grain before it could be harvested. Then, their goats finished whatever remained. By the time they left, there was nothing to eat and nothing to plant. Not this season. And because there was no seed grain left, not next season either. 7 years of that. 7 years of watching the land. Your ancestors crossed a river to inherit, become a place you can no longer feed your family from. 7 years of climbing into mountain caves and dens to survive. 7 years of people being slowly, quietly ground into dust. By the time Gideon appears, the Israelites had retreated into hiding. They held the title deed to the promised land and were living in it like strangers in a house they were afraid to enter. Gideon is not unusual. He is a perfect portrait of his entire generation. Capable people doing desperate things in impossible conditions, trying to survive what they no longer have the strength to fight. And somewhere in that 7th year, a man named Gideon is crouched in a wine press, trying to salvage enough grain to keep his family alive, throwing fistfuls of wheat into air that is not moving. He is not strategizing. He is doing the only thing a man does when 7 years of unrelenting loss has taken everything except the instinct to survive. He is enduring, not with fire in his chest, not with a battle cry forming in his throat, with his head down in a hole, hoping the enemy does not see the grain dust rising. Stop and feel the weight of that before we go any further, because what happens next is not God showing up after Gideon pulled himself together. It is not God rewarding endurance with dignity and composure. God does not wait for the circumstances to improve or for the man to feel more qualified. God shows up in the winepress in the 7th year, while the chaff is still falling. Now we need to slow down and look at the actual words on the page. Because the English translation, as faithful as it is carrying freight underneath it that most readers never reach. Let's start before verse 14. Let's start with the greeting. Before God commissions Gideon, before he says a word about might or saving Israel, he opens with a title. Judges 6:12. The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. Mighty man of valor. In Hebrew, that is Gibbor Hayil. Those 2 words are not generic encouragement. They are not the ancient equivalent of keep your chin up. Gibbor Hayil is a military classification. It is the same phrase used in 1 Chronicles 11 to describe David's elite fighting unit, the hand-picked inner circle of warriors who performed exploits so extreme that the rest of Israel's army told stories about them for generations. These were not soldiers. These were the soldiers other soldiers talked about, champions, men defined entirely by what they had already proven. That is the title God drops onto a man failing at threshing wheat in a pit. Not good effort, not I see potential. Gibbor Hayil, the title of a proven elite warrior, placed without apology onto someone who has not fought anyone, who is hiding from the enemy, who is about to respond to this greeting, not with confidence, but with a complaint. That is not a mistake in the text. That is a theological statement about the distance between how God sees and how we see. Now to the commission itself, verse 14. Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of Midian. Hebrew, lech bekochaka ze. 3 words doing an enormous amount of work. Coach is the word for strength, power, and capacity. It is used throughout the Old Testament for physical might, for military force, for the raw ability to do something demanding. When the Psalms speak of God's power, when Isaiah speaks of those who wait on the Lord renewing their strength, the word is coach. It is not a soft word, not a metaphor. It is the real, operational word for power. But then God attaches ze. Ze is a demonstrative pronoun. It points. It does not speak in general principles. It indicates something specific, something present, something you could theoretically reach out and touch in that moment. And this is where the text detonates. God is not saying go in strength as a timeless principle. He is saying, go in this strength. And the ze is pointing at whatever is actually in that winepress in that moment. What is in that winepress? A man who just told God in verse 13, to his face, that God had abandoned Israel. A man is doing the wrong agricultural process in the wrong location for the wrong reason. A man so afraid of the Midianites that he will accept terrible results over any exposure. A man with no army, no plan, no track record, and no confidence. That is what Zay is pointing at, and God calls it coach. Do not move past that quickly. God is not saying the strength is buried somewhere inside Gideon, and he just needs to find it. God is pointing at the fear, at the hiding, at the inadequacy, at the complaint, at the man who has nothing to offer except that he is still there, still trying to feed his family in the 7th year, still threshing wheat in a pit that was never designed for threshing, and he calls it strength. Then the verb. The word translated, "you shall save," comes from the root yasha, to save, to deliver, to rescue. But notice the grammatical weight. It is not stated as a possibility, not "maybe you will save" or "try to save." The deliverance is declared with the certainty of something already completed. Before Gideon has agreed, before the fleeces, before the 300 men, before a single torch is lit, in God's framing, it is already done. The only open variable is whether Gideon will walk into what God has already declared, finished. And then God closes with a question that is not really a question. Have I not sent you? 3 Hebrew words. Halo shlaktika. This is not God asking Gideon to verify his own resume. This is God dismantling the entire framework Gideon is using to evaluate himself. Every time Gideon looks inward and finds nothing worth sending, God is pointing him back to the one who sent him. The question is not, "Are you enough?" The question is, "Am I not the one who sent you?" Those are not the same question, and only one of them has the weight to hold a man upright in a winepress. Now, I want to show you something about this text that most people never see, and once you see it, you will understand that what we have been looking at is not just one verse about one man in one desperate moment. It is the theological heart of an entire book. The book of Judges is a carefully, deliberately constructed literary argument, and the author built it using a structure that ancient writers used to signal to their readers, "Pay attention here. This is where the meaning lives." The structure is called a chiasm. A chiasm is a symmetrical mirror pattern. The author arranges his material so that the first section corresponds to the last, the second corresponds to the second to last, and so on, all the way inward until you reach the center. The center of a chiasm is never accidental. It is the point the entire structure is pointing toward. It is where the author buried the theological core of everything he is saying. In the book of Judges, the chiastic structure places the Gideon narrative at the exact center, not Samson, not Deborah, not the catastrophic final chapters. Gideon. Every judge before Gideon has a corresponding judge after him. The opening cycles of Israel's apostasy mirror the closing cycles of collapse. The whole book folds inward, and the fold lands on Judges 6 through 8, but it goes deeper than that. Within the Gideon narrative itself, there is a second chiastic structure, a concentric pattern inside the centerpiece. And when you map it out, the center of that inner structure, the pivot point of the entire book of Judges, is not the battle. It is not the moment Gideon lights the torches and blows the trumpets. It is not the military victory. It is Gideon's personal faith struggle. Judges 6:33 through 7:18, the fleeces, the doubt, the man who needs God to wet the wool and dry the ground, and then needs God to reverse it before he can believe what God has already told him plainly. That is the center. The author of Judges arranged 12 chapters, 15 judges, generation after generation of apostasy and deliverance, so that when you follow the architecture all the way inward, what you find at the absolute core is not a triumph. It is a man who cannot stop being afraid, and that was not a flaw in the design. That was the design. Because the question this book is asking is not what does a hero look like. The question, embedded in the architecture itself, is this: what does God do with someone whose fear is the only currency they have left? And the answer is placed at the center. He calls it might. He points at it. He builds the whole deliverance out of it, and he puts it at the center of the book so that no one who reads carefully can ever mistake where the power was coming from. I want you to think about someone named Raymond. Raymond is 71 years old. He has walked with God for most of his adult life. He was baptized as a young man, and he meant every word of it. He raised his children in the church. He served on the deacon board for 17 years. He taught Sunday school to teenagers who are now grandparents themselves. He prayed through hard seasons and watched God come through. Not always the way Raymond asked, but he came through. Raymond knows that. He would tell you that without hesitation. But 3 years ago, Raymond's wife of 41 years died, and something shifted that he does not have a word for. Not a crisis of faith, not anger at God, something quieter and more disorienting than anger. The woman who sat next to him in the same pew for 4 decades, who prayed with him every morning over coffee, who remembered the sermons he forgot and reminded him of the promises he let slip, she is gone. And Raymond still gets up, still reads his Bible, still prays, but he reads it now the way a man reads old letters from someone he is no longer sure he has direct access to. Carefully, gratefully. But from a distance he cannot fully explain and is too tired to try to close. He has not told anyone this. He would not know how to say it without sounding ungrateful for everything God has already done. So he says he is fine. And mostly, he means it. He is still threshing wheat underground, hoping no one looks too closely at how much chaff is coming back down. Now, here is the question. Judges 6 is asking Raymond directly, what if God walked into that wine press this morning? Not after Raymond works through the grief, not after he finds his way back to the open threshing floor, not after he feels like himself again. What if God walked in right now, in the 7th year, while the chaff is still falling, and looked at Raymond and used the title Raymond quietly gave up on somewhere in the last 3 years? Not the title of what Raymond used to be, the title of what God is about to do with what Raymond still is. Stop and feel the weight of that. The Zay God is pointing at in Raymond's life is not the Raymond of 40 years ago, not the man who stood at the front of a Sunday school room and spoke about God with fire and certainty. It is the man who is still here, still holding the word with both hands even when the words feel further away than they used to, still getting up, still showing up, still throwing grain into air that does not seem to be moving the way it once did. That quiet faithfulness in the fog, that unannounced persistence through 3 years of learning how to exist in a world that is shaped wrong without her. That is the coach God is pointing at, because the person who knows they are running on empty is the only person who will not later stand in the victory and quietly begin to believe it was their own strength that won it. God does not need Raymond to feel strong. He needs Raymond to remember who sent him. Now, I need to take you somewhere. Because everything we have looked at in Judges 6, the winepress, the title, the Zay, the prophetic certainty of the deliverance, all of it is pointing forward. Pointing towards something the author of Judges could only see in silhouette, something that would not come into full focus for another 1,000 years. The New Testament mentions Gideon exactly once. Hebrews 11:32-34. The writer has been building the great catalog of faith, Abraham, Moses, Rahab, David, and then he arrives at Gideon and does not have space to tell the whole story, so he does not try. He compresses the entire Gideon narrative into one phrase, whose weakness was turned to strength. Read that again. Not whose courage was finally rewarded, not whose hidden potential was unlocked, not whose faith was strong enough to overcome his fear, whose weakness was turned to strength. The New Testament writer understood exactly what was happening in Judges 6:14. He understood that the Zay was pointing at the weakness. He understood that God did not transform Gideon into a different kind of man before sending him. He took the weakness itself and turned it into the instrument of deliverance. The weakness was not the obstacle God worked around. The weakness was the material God worked with. Now trace that logic forward one more step, because Gideon is not where this story ends. He is where it becomes legible. Jesus entered the world in the most disqualifying conditions imaginable by every standard of human power. An occupied territory, a working-class family, a birth so unremarkable that the most powerful empire on earth did not notice it happened. No standing army, no political institution, no inherited platform. And then the cross. Rome designed crucifixion specifically to communicate one thing beyond any doubt. This person had no power. It was public, slow, and deliberately humiliating, engineered to ensure that anyone watching would understand that the person dying had been stripped of every claim to strength, dignity, and significance. And God pointed at it, not around it, not past it, at it. This is my might. In this is the salvation of the world. Bakochaka ze, go in this. The cross is the ultimate winepress, the place no human strategy would ever choose, the place where every external measurement of strength ran completely dry, and God built the hinge of all human history inside it. Paul names this logic without flinching in 1 Corinthians 1:27-28. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. This is not a pattern God falls back on when better options are not available. This is how God works. This is his signature. Gideon in the winepress, Jesus on the cross, Raymond at his kitchen table reading old letters in the half-dark of a Tuesday morning. The same Zay, the same pointer, the same voice asking the same question. Have I not sent you? That question is not asking you to assess your own readiness. It is not a personality test or a spiritual competency evaluation. It is not asking whether you feel like the person God described or whether the gap between who he says you are and who you currently feel like seems manageable. It is asking you one thing only. Am I not the one who sent you? And if the answer is yes, then your adequacy was never the variable that mattered. The sender is the only credential that was ever on the table. Not your history. Not your strength in its best season. Not the version of you that once stood on the open threshing floor with confidence and wind at your back. The sender. He has already named you. He is already pointing. That is enough. If this channel has given you depth you stopped believing was available to you on this platform, think of one person right now who is sitting in their own wine press. Someone who has gone quieter than they used to be about their faith. Someone who is still showing up, but from a distance they cannot explain. Share this documentary directly with them, not to serve an algorithm, but because that is exactly how someone in a pit finds their grounding. And if the ancient research, the language deconstructions, and the narrative architecture we bring to these videos every week matter to you, consider joining our channel to help keep this scale of documentary production independent and sustainable. Step out of the performance. We will see you in the next one.